Hello, everyone, and welcome to some Stops Along the Way special episode that is going to focus on some of the good, the bad, and the just plain weird things I've got myself into around the world. This is the second episode where we're going to touch on some of these, and we'll get to them in a moment. First, you can find many of these stories and others that I won't feature on the podcast in my memoir, Some Stops Along the Way, which is available on Amazon. And also, I want to remind you of a four-book set, the only series that I've ever written. Four books. They're not new. They've been out for quite some time, but I want to remind you of them. The first book is called Mozart's Ghost. The second one is When We Were Young. The third one, The Monsters Come at Night. And the fourth and final installment of the Mozart's Ghost series is Ilsa's Requiem. If you like espionage novels, spy novels, if you will, if you are hooked on Jack Ryan and Jason Bourne, you're going to love these books. Read them in order. Mozart's Ghost, When We Were Young, The Monsters Come at Night, and Ilsa's Requiem. And I think that you will very rapidly become addicted to Ilsa Becker, codenamed Mozart's Ghost, and the cast of characters around her. All right, let's jump into the second episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Just Plain Weird. I want to pick up today with a really surrealistic experience that I had on the island of Corregidor in the Philippines. I was working there and had just an intense schedule. I mean, a schedule that was just almost crippling at times. But many of you may know that I am a World War II historian. I'm a historian by education, but especially I love World War II history. And being in the Philippines, one of the places I really wanted to see was Corregidor Island. So a friend of mine and I left early on a Saturday on the Star Ferry and went from Manila across to the island of Corregidor, which of course was the site of the United States surrender in World War II, and then Japan's later surrender of the island back to the United States later in the war. One of the central locations on Corregidor Island is the Malita Tunnel. This is a tunnel where the Americans took refuge during the brutal assault on the island by the Japanese in 1942. And it held its hospital, its command headquarters, etc. And just walking into this tunnel was a surrealistic experience for me. And as I walked through that dark tunnel and began to understand the magnitude of what had occurred there, not just for the Americans, but then later the Japanese took refuge in that tunnel when the American onslaught began to retake Corregidor. It was almost overwhelming. But I bring up this story because it's there that I got the idea to write my first novel, which is called Intersections. It's still available on Amazon today. I wrote it in 2012, not long after I made that trip to Corregidor. As I said, the idea came to me as I was standing in that dark tunnel, and I decided, I think this is a good idea. I'm going to write it. And that's really what got me started on the genre of historic fiction. Another thing that happened to me in the Philippines, And I still find this quite funny to this day. We were working with a stakeholder there in one of the ministries, and I won't mention the ministry just in case some of my friends from the Philippines are watching. But the deputy minister of that particular ministry, her name was Caroline, but she insisted on being called a nickname. And one thing I learned early on in the Philippines is that they love their nicknames. They absolutely love them. Well, her nickname was Baby. And many Filipinos have this nickname, especially if they're the youngest in their family. They're called Baby. And Caroline's a deputy minister, but she insists on being called Baby. I tried to call her by her name or Madam Deputy Minister. She insisted on being called Baby, both verbally and in email. So I had all these weird emails like Dear Baby. It was just the most surreal thing in the world. And I couldn't not call her Baby. And I told her, I joked with her one time that if my wife ever reads my email, I'm in real trouble because it's going to look like something's happening that's not happening. And her deputy, her nickname was Star. And so you had all this weird dynamic of calling people nicknames that was really perplexing to me. And I found out too early on that the Filipinos love acronyms. For whatever reason, they just love them. It's like you're in the military every day because they're always using acronyms. For instance, we were working with the Undersecretary of Commerce, and the acronym for that they always used for the Undersecretary of Commerce was USEC-C. Well, you see where this is going, right? So one morning, I'm at the hotel and I'm sitting with my colleague Sherry, and we're talking about the schedule for the day. And I asked Sherry, "Okay, what's our schedule for today?" And she said, "Let me get out my notebook." She pulls out her notebook, and I said, "Okay, where are we starting the day?" And she says, "USEC-C." And I said, "Thank you so much, but where are we starting the day?" And it took her just a minute to get it. And then she looked at me and said, "Okay, just stop it right now." And I still get a big kick out of that to this day. I'm usually not that quick on the comebacks, but in that case, the timing of it was just perfect. And probably the only time that anyone would ever have said USEC-C to me, and it was the acronym for the Undersecretary of Commerce. Anyway, the Philippines, another amazing place. And one of the reasons I'm sharing these stories with you from around the world is that I'm trying to encourage you to go out and have experiences of your own. Because everything I'm sharing with you, I never thought I would have one of these experiences, let alone all of them. And so it's just an amazing thing to me that every time I talk about them, they bring back great memories. And I'm just so happy that I had those experiences. So let's go to Tunisia. Now, this was in December of 2012. I had worked in Tunisia extensively, and Debbie had come to visit me there, and we were on, it was work, but we were on a tour of the entire country from north to south to east to west for me to call on stakeholders. And so Debbie went with me on that trip, and we saw the entire width and depth of Tunisia during a few week period during that trip. One of the funniest things that we experienced was that we were down in the south of the country in the Sahara Desert. And my work was done for the day. And so we were driving from one location to another, and we got there early. And I had set up a camel ride in the Sahara Desert for Debbie because I thought she would think it was a really great experience. And so we get there in the late afternoon. They get the camels prepared and all the supplies that we were going to need. And then we get on the camels, which is a wild experience anyway. If you've ever ridden a one-hump camel especially, I've ridden both two humps and one humps. At least with two humps, camels, when they get up, you have something to bounce off of because you're in between the humps. But on the one hump camels, when they get up, you really have to hold on because they get up with their back feet. And so you're down like this, and all of a sudden the front feet come up and you're like this. So our camels finally got up, and Debbie and I managed to hang on, and we're up, and we're following our Bedouin guide on this trek through the vast sands of the Sahara Desert. And things are going well. It's really a surreal, almost a spiritual experience. The sun is beginning to set. It's beautiful. And that's about the time that my camel, which was in front of Debbie's camel, got a severe case of flatulence. And for the next couple of hours, my camel did nothing but but expel gas in the face of her camel and her, and it got to be so funny, and they were loud and long, and it got to be so funny that Debbie could barely sit on her camel because every time my camel would walk a few steps, there it would go. A huge expel of gas. And our guide was laughing so hard as well. And so we had quite a trip through the Sahara Desert that night with the farting camel. Really, really interesting stuff. Um, Tunisia is a fantastic place, and I think you would very much enjoy it. And I will share one more story from that beautiful country. My office was in Tunis, the capital, but on weekends I would often go to what the locals joked was my second office, which is in Sidi Bou Said, which is a small town on the Mediterranean, a few kilometers from Tunis. It is an absolutely beautiful place. It's white. Everything's white with blue doors or yellow doors and blue domes. It looks very much like Santorini without the people. And so I would go there ritualistically every weekend and hang out, do some work, sit at the cafes overlooking the harbor, have coffee, walk around this beautiful community. I was there so much that the locals started to know me. But one day in the spring, I'm walking down one of the back streets in Sidi Bou Said on a Saturday morning. And I walk by a wall with a singular blue door in it that I walk by virtually every week. And every week I would note of the beautiful bougainvilleas that were growing in on obviously a garden on the other side, and then flowing over the wall. It was absolutely beautiful, and there was nothing there except this blue door. And every week I would walk by that, and finally one week I decided, this is it. I'm going to find out what's behind that blue door. I tried to talk myself out of it several times. I made a few laps around because I'd lose my nerve to knock on it. But then finally, I knocked on that blue door. And boy, am I glad I did. Because a very nice French Tunisian lady answered. I told her the story about passing that door all the time and seeing those beautiful flowers and wondering what was there. And she invited me into one of the most beautiful gardens that I've ever seen. And for the next several weeks, while she was in country, I would stop and have tea with her in that beautiful garden. And I often wondered how my experience in Tunisia would have been so much less if I'd lost my nerve and didn't knock on that door. And this is a life lesson. When we have an opportunity in front of us and we're afraid to take advantage of it, we need to knock on the door, because that's what I did there, and I've never regretted it. I met an amazing person, but I also saw one of the most beautiful sights that I've ever seen. Okay, let's move on now. We're going to go from the beautiful Mediterranean to Russian Siberia. I did many projects in Russia early in my career, and I spent an entire winter in Siberia doing projects in Vladivostok, in Khabarovsk, in Irkutsk. And Irkutsk, especially, is the center of Siberia. It's on the shores of Lake Baikal, which is the deepest lake in the world. And it was frigid, absolutely frigid. Flew there in a snowstorm, landed. It was, I believe, about minus 35 degrees centigrade when we landed, and that was a warm day, and it got colder from there. And I no sooner got off the plane, I fell 3 times at the airport because I didn't have the right shoes on. Um, I had come to Russia on that trip from Indonesia, and so I had to buy a coat. And when I got to Russia, and it was a heavy coat, but I hadn't bought the right boots. I hadn't bought a hat. Like I said, I fell 3 times at the airport on the snow and ice. I I met my guide there, my colleague there, Olga, and fell again on the way out of the airport. By the time I got to the hotel, I fell once trying to get into the hotel because of the ice and snow. So she showed up the next day with heavy, heavy boots and a big fur beaver hat. I looked like a sight for sore eyes wearing this huge hat and my huge parka and these boots. But that's the only way I ever survived Irkutsk. Um, and it was a fantastic experience. But another life lesson here: make sure you know where you're going and that you show up with the right gear, because I missed it on that case. And if it hadn't been for Olga, I probably would have broken a limb trying to navigate that Siberian winter. We drove one day for a long time on what I thought was a road, and actually we were driving across the frozen Lake Baikal, where we bought fish in a snowstorm, took them to a restaurant, and they cooked our fish at their restaurant, and we sat there in the snow and had just a very nice chat and meal. Just one of those experiences that is pretty amazing stuff. Go from Russia now to Ukraine. Anybody who knows me knows my affection for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. I worked there in the late 1990s, but I went back again extensively after the full scale invasion in 2022 and spent a great deal of time working in Ukraine during its current war. And that included a lot of time underground in air raid shelters. It spent it it included one of the most um, impactful memories that I have in my career is having the opportunity to go to Bucha, Ukraine, where during the Battle of Kiev, after the full-scale invasion began on February 24th of 2022, the the Russians literally encircled Kiev. They went into Bucha, which is a suburb, and it looked like they were going to take Kiev. But they stalled out in Bucha, and they created pandemonium in that city. Rapes, murders, debauchery. You name it, the Russian army did it. And of course, they didn't take Kiev. They were driven back, and the capital was spared, but Bucha was not. And about a year or so later, I had the chance to go and lay a wreath at the memorial for those that were killed in the genocide in Bucha, which is outside of its main cathedral there. Talked to the priest at the main cathedral who showed me pictures on his phone that were horrific of what the Russians did while they were there. But standing there and laying that wreath to honor those who were killed in that genocide, and talking to the survivors, talking to young women who had been assaulted, talking to that priest, it was an amazing time for me. A time that made me sad, it made me angry, but it also reinforced to me the importance of why we were in Ukraine and what we were doing. Just an amazing memory. Okay, now I'm going to take you in a different direction. I'm going to go to Canada. I have not worked in Canada, but I've traveled extensively in Canada. And very recently, I went there to speak at a conference in Ottawa, which, of course, is the national capital of Canada. And there is a hotel that's on Parliament Hill in Ottawa called the Fairmont Saint Laurier Hotel. It's a very historic, beautiful, beautiful property. Probably one of the nicest hotels I've stayed in recent times. And I had a horrific time getting to that conference. I had a flight out of Atlanta that landed in Toronto at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, as Canadian Airlines usually do, WestJet canceled the afternoon flight. And so I ended up spending almost 14 hours in the Toronto airport to take a 45-minute flight to Ottawa. So I arrived in Ottawa in the middle of the night. I was dog tired. I took a car from the hotel, or from the airport rather, to the hotel. And I'm checking into the hotel and there's no one around because it's the middle of the night. And the young lady at the front desk jokes with me, Mr. McCord, this hotel is haunted. So please keep a lookout when you're headed to your room. And I laughed, and the lobby was dark. They had most of the lights off. It actually was a super creepy looking experience in this historic hotel. But I told her, I said, look, ghost or not, I'm so tired that, even if I would notice the ghost, I would just say, like, dude, do your thing. I don't care. I'm going to bed. But the whole time that I was walking to the elevator and then walking to my room, down those narrow, dark hallways, I was thinking about this haunted hotel experience. And then I read the next day why it's supposedly haunted, because the person who had built the hotel, whose name escapes me right now, but the person who had developed and built that hotel went down on the Titanic a few days before the hotel was actually opened. And so supposedly he never got to see the hotel because he died in the Titanic disaster. And so supposedly he now walks the halls of the hotel that he never got to see in his lifetime. I don't believe in ghosts, but it was a super creepy experience. Along that same line, I'll take you to Kosovo. Years and years before that. This is back in the early 2000s, late 1990s actually, early 2000s. I did a lot of projects in Kosovo, and I stayed at this hotel in Kosovo's capital, Pristina, that was called the Grand Hotel. And it was there that I made a pact that I would never, ever stay in another hotel called the Grand, because this might have been called the Grand Hotel, but even then it was a sorry state of a hotel. But it was right in the center square of Pristina. And It was a creepy, creepy place. This was when, in the aftermath of the war, when Kosovo was still governed, if you will, or its security was guaranteed by different countries within a coalition, and the British were in Pristina. And so, in staying at this hotel and doing my work, I would go back and it rarely had electricity. It was old, decrepit. I found out later on that the basement of that hotel had been used as a Serbian torture chamber during the war. This hotel just had bad juju all over it. But there was no place else really at that time to stay. So years later, I went back to Pristina for work, and they built a very beautiful hotel a few blocks away from the Grand, which was now empty. It's tied up in litigation, so it's just sitting there like a rotting corpse. It's just empty. So I stayed at this beautiful new hotel down the street, and I walked down to the Grand, and I looked up at it, and I could identify my room on the second to the top floor on the corner, my old room, where I'd spent so many days sitting in the dark and cold in this ultra creepy hotel. And I, a lot of memories came back to me just standing there of how hopeless Kosovo seemed at that time, but how later on it got its legs under it and became a country that now has a whole lot going for it. But boy, in those days, sitting in that cold and decrepit Grand Hotel, I certainly wondered whether Kosovo could ever even attain half of what it is today. But good for them. They absolutely did it. So let me take you to Rwanda quickly. I spent a lot of my career working on the African continent, and had the chance to visit Rwanda for work and pleasure very many times. And one of the things that Debbie and I most remember about our time in Africa was going gorilla trekking in Rwanda. What an amazing experience. It's expensive, but it is something that's so worth it. We flew in to Kigali and stayed at the Serena Hotel, met our guide there, and headed to Volcanoes National Park, where we were going to trek gorillas. And the way it works is that you're in a small group, and your guide, you go with guides who are actual rangers, and you have porters. It used to be, most of them used to be poachers, but now they serve as porters, and they carry your gear into the rainforest, and you trek as long as it takes to find these mountain gorillas. Now, spotters go up in the morning and find out where the gorillas are, and then they guide you to them through the jungle. But you might hike 2 hours, you might hike 5 hours, you might hike 7 hours to see these gorillas. Well, in our case, it was about 3.5 hours that we had to hike through the dense rainforest. And with the guides going ahead of us with machetes, cutting things down along the way. At one point in time, Debbie got attacked by fire ants, but we made it through that jungle and walked out into this small clearing, and were surrounded by mountain gorillas, including a big silverback who was just massive. And Debbie and I are absolutely freaked out because we thought that we might see them from a hillside and just be able to photograph them. But you were close enough to touch these gorillas. In fact, Debbie had the long lens on her camera, and she was struggling to get another lens on her camera so she could take photos because we were too close to them. It was absolutely amazing. And the way it works is that you get to photograph the gorillas. Once you find them, you get to photograph them for 1 hour, and then you have to leave. And it was so funny because we photographed this group of gorillas, which was called the Sabino group. They had two little gorillas in the group, two babies. And we photographed them up close and personal for an hour. And then right as that hour ended, the big silverback, like he knew that the hour was up. I don't know. But he looks at us and then leads his group back into the rainforest. Like, okay, your time's up, the hour's over, we're out of here. But what an amazing experience that was, to trek through the rainforest to find those beautiful gorillas. Of course, Debbie and I loved everything about Africa. And we have so many endearing experiences there, but one in Kenya. When we lived in Kenya, I ran the Young African Leaders Initiative Regional Leadership Center for East Africa at Kenyatta University in Nairobi. It was an initiative of President Obama. He actually opened the center, and I got to hang with President Obama, which was fantastic. But as director of that center, we lived in Nairobi, and Debbie, who is an amazing photographer, just fell in love with wildlife photography. And I don't mean to say she was on safari a lot, but she had her own guide named Peter. And Peter was a savant in being able to find game. We took many safaris with Peter while we were there, in Masai Mara, in Samburu, and Amboseli, and really everywhere in between. Lake Navaisha, Lake Nakuru, you name it, we were there on safari. And every time he would find the game. He would find the leopards, which are notoriously hard to find. He would find the black rhino, the white rhino. He'd put us in the middle of elephants. He would put us in the middle of herds of wildebeest and zebra. It's like Africa 2.0 on steroids. And he delivered every single time. But one of our most endearing memories was we did all these safaris and throughout Africa, but we had never seen a kill. And it was amazing because on our last safari in Kenya, before we moved to our next project, we've been on safari since then, but this was our last one as director of the Yali Regional Leadership Center. A few days before I stepped down from that position, because it was the end of my mandate there, we went on a final safari with Peter. And we're in Masai Mara in a place called the Mara Triangle. And we are driving through one part of the Mara, and it's tall grass season. And we see the grass waving. And at one point we had been out of the vehicle and walked over, because we had visas to Tanzania. So we had walked over the border from Kenya to Tanzania, to the Serengeti, which abut each other, taking photos, etc. And then Peter looked over and saw the grass waving. He said, we need to get back in the vehicle. So he got back and he drives over there, and here comes a pride of 9 lions. There was a male and several very big females. And they are walking through the tall grass. We are the only ones out here. We're the only safari vehicle anywhere around, sitting there watching this beautiful pride of 9 lions. They cross the road in front of us. And as they are crossing the road, a gazelle had been sitting in the tall grass. And he heard a disturbance, and so the gazelle stood up. And right then, all of the lions start crouching down. They get in a semicircle, and they began to move toward that gazelle. And the gazelle is frozen in place. It's like literally the deer before headlights. Look, he's frozen. He doesn't know what to do. And Peter looks at us and says, all these safaris we've been on and never saw a kill, you're getting ready to see one right now. And sure enough, finally the gazelle decides to run. It turns to run, and before it can even move, these big females are on that gazelle. And we sat there in the middle of Masai Mara, only vehicle anywhere in sight, and watched our first kill, which you may think is morbid, but it's a circle of life. And I know people who have been on even more safaris than we've been on that have never seen a kill. So to be able to see that was absolutely amazing in its own right. I could go on and on about Africa. Um, there's nothing that I don't love about it. From the first time I saw an African sunrise, I was hooked, and from then on, I would work there any chance that I got. I remember in Zambia taking a wild and woolly bus ride across Zambia after I had dislocated my elbow falling at Victoria Falls, which is on the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe. I was headed back for medical intervention in um, Blantyre, Zimbabwe, and I had to ride the bus. And I was on that bus. I was the only white person on the bus. I've got a dislocated elbow, which is in a sling. The bus is packed with people. I'm up against a wall, which was good because it immobilized my arm. And I thought it was going to be a horrifying trip back to Blantyre, but actually, it turned out to be a great one because I forgot about how much my arm hurt because of just the joyous people on the bus that were singing and sharing food and and just doing what Africans do, which is just make you happy. And that was an amazing time. I remember again in Kenya, the visit by U.S. President Barack Obama when we opened the Regional Leadership Center, East Africa. And we had been told on the days up to it that we don't want any logos in the picture. He's going to come in, he's going to shake hands, he's going to move through quickly. And so we had pulled our signs of the Regional Leadership Center out of the picture frames as we had been told to do by the White House. And the appointed time comes and in comes President Obama. And immediately he says, well, this is a Regional Leadership Center. Where are your banners? And so those banners that we were told we couldn't use, on the spur of the moment, we had to pull them together into a backdrop. And I have a picture that hangs in my office of myself and President Obama and Rita Roy of the MasterCard Foundation and my good friend Olive Mugenda, president of Kenyatta University, standing with President Obama on that beautiful day when the Regional Leadership Center East Africa opened. There wasn't one day that I led that center that I didn't enjoy. And so many amazing graduates now are doing some fantastic things in Africa. Staying in Africa, how about Bukavu, Democratic Republic of the Congo? In eastern Congo, it's a pretty lawless place. And I was there for work, and navigating Bukavu was unbelievable. And after a long day of work one day, my Congolese friends took me by a shop that was selling trinkets from Congo. And in there, I found a very, very old tribal mask that I bought that started me down a rabbit trail of then buying a tribal mask in virtually every African country that I went to. So my office is filled with those, and my closet's filled with them because I can't fit them all in my office. But it all started in Bukavu, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I remember when I flew into Congo, into Kinshasa, the capital, just a wild city, people everywhere. It's the only country in the world that has robot traffic signals. They were designed by a group of Congolese female engineers, and they are robots that are traffic lights. So when they flash green, you go. When they flash red, you stop. They turn in different directions. It's just amazing to see in this teeming city things like traffic light robots. I also had my friends take me to the stadium where the Rumble in the Jungle occurred. Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. It was really important for me to see that, and I was extremely glad that I got to. But the day that we left Kinshasa to fly out to Bukavu, the weather was terrible. It was pouring rain. I didn't even think we were going to fly, but sure enough, we did. We got out on a UN plane. We flew to the airport in Goma, which is on one side of Lake Kivu. Bukavu's on the other. And then we changed to a small plane, and they put our luggage on that plane. They fly across the lake to Bukavu. And we land in Bukavu. I get out. There's an old ramshackle terminal there. It's a tiny place. I go in and wait for my luggage. Doesn't come. So I finally ask one of the ground staff at the airport, "Where's my luggage?" So, "Oh, I'm sorry, your luggage. There's a problem. It didn't come. We don't know where it is. On the wrong plane." But I looked out of the window and I could see the plane that I flew in on, and the cargo door was open and I could see my bag on the plane. I said, "No, my bag is right there." "No, that's not your bag." Finally, I grab the guy by the arm. I walk out there across the tarmac to where that plane is sitting. And I said, "That is my bag." And I showed him the luggage tag. "Oh, okay." So I go back in the terminal. Bag still doesn't come. I said, "What?" And so finally, my bag shows up after sitting out there where I could see it for the better part of an hour and a half. And then the guy says that it's overweight. Oddly enough, it wasn't overweight when they put it on the plane, but now it was overweight. And he had to give me a quote unquote fine. That's just Congo, my friends. As a matter of fact, things like that happened all over Africa when I was there. And we had a term for it. It was called TIA. This is Africa. Things you couldn't explain, but they happen every single day. That's why I love the place so much, and I love the people so much. And in a few weeks, we're going to be starting on an entire series on the Some Stops Along the Way podcast on different countries in Africa, and I'll share more stories with you there. Let's jump over now to Israel. Again, so many stories I could share. I shared a couple on the last episode about Jerusalem, but this one is about Haifa. Had some work to do, and I was up in Haifa for several days, and I had the chance to attend a church up there called Kiryat HaCarmel, the Carmel congregation it translates to. And the Carmel congregation was started by a guy named David Davis, who was a missionary. He's passed away now. But David Davis was actually a Broadway performer who came to salvation under Dave Wilkerson Ministries in New York. And he felt called to go to Israel and start a fellowship of Jews and Arabs worshiping together. And that's what Kiryat HaCarmel is, the Carmel congregation. It's a church where Jews and Arabs who believe in Christ come together and worship together in their own languages. So, for instance, every song that's sung during a Sunday morning service is sung in English, in Hebrew, and in Arabic. It is a surreal experience. And I attended with a colleague that was a Christ-believing Arab. as well as a Messianic Jew, one that was a Messianic Jew, and it was an amazing experience to stand there and listen to this worship in these three languages and to see people who have been sworn enemies from the day they were born come together and worship together. It was absolutely a surreal experience. I'll jump over to India now. Boy, don't get me started on stories from India, but a couple that are quite funny. When I was working there, I had there was a national holiday, and so I had a little bit of time and wanted to go from Delhi to Jaipur to see the several of the palaces in the Red Fort in Jaipur, and so we took a road trip there, and we're coming into Jaipur, and we stop at a stoplight. And I look out the side window. I'm sitting in the back seat of the car, and I look out the side window, and there's a man on an elephant. Just elephant stopped at the stoplight, just like we are. Man on top of it, elephant. I look out the other window, there, and there is a bull, a cow, on the other side. So there's an elephant with a guy on top of it on one side, a cow on the other side, our car in the middle. And I can't think of a better story for India than that, because that's India. Debilitating traffic. It assaults every sense that you have, from your hearing to your sight to your taste. And odd things like this happen all the time. So if that happened to me again, I wouldn't even flinch. Elephant on one side, cow on the other, car in the middle. Nicio problema, as we would say in Romania. No problem. Wouldn't even shake me up now. So I'll share one more with you. And this comes from Poland. I was working in Ukraine. I'm spending a lot of time in Krakow because that was kind of the jumping off point for the drive into Ukraine. And I was just coming out of Ukraine after a long trip. And my Lufthansa canceled my flight from Krakow to the United States. So I had a down day in Krakow. So I decided to take another trip. I'd been there before, but another trip out to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Well, if you know anything about World War II history, you know the grim history of Auschwitz. So I go to Auschwitz. We're taking the tour. We're walking through the camp. This is at Auschwitz I. And later we would go to Auschwitz-Birkenau. But we're at Auschwitz I. I'm in a small group of people who's walking through. And we get toward the end of the tour where we are standing in front of the gas chamber where so many Jews, Poles, and Gypsies were exterminated during World War II. And there was a young lady on our tour who I found out later was an influencer. And as our guide explained the gas chamber, she said, please, you can walk through it, but please be respectful. And so this young lady walks into the gas chamber ahead of me. And I'm standing in the gas chamber. Now, hear what I'm saying. This is the gas chamber where untold number of people were exterminated and then burned in ovens. And this young lady takes a selfie. I was so shocked. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even believe it happened. And then she starts to go live. And this Polish lady behind me, thankfully, because I was still in kind of a shock trance, this Polish lady jumps in and gave her the lecture of her life. And the young lady didn't realize that she was doing anything wrong. Like, what is wrong with you? Seriously. Unbelievable. After that tour was over, we got on a shuttle bus and were taken to Auschwitz II, Birkenau, another soulless place that was built because the Nazis needed a larger camp to be able to exterminate more people. Auschwitz I was too small. So they built Birkenau, and you went in on a train car underneath underneath a gate in this long building that went through this long building. And so we traveled that route, and we were let out, and we walked under that gate along the railroad track up to where the center of the camp would be, and the guides were standing there. And I'm in a little bit of a larger group now. And so I'm standing there, and there were two guides because we were such a large group. And the main guide looks at us and says, all right, because we have too many people here, we're going to have two guides, and we're going to separate you. And she looks at me and says, all of you who are over 55 years old, raise your hand. I raised my hand. Several of us raised hands. Okay, you stand here. Sir, I see that you're walking on a cane. You stand over here as well. Anyone who doesn't have white skin, please join us over here. And over the next few moments, she separated everybody out. And by this time, I knew what was going to happen. She said, okay, those of you who are standing here, which happen to be all white, relatively young people, she said, you go with this guide and she'll take you through the camp. This group, which was my group, she said, all of you follow me and I'm taking you directly to the gas chamber. Because that's exactly what would have happened if you had arrived here in 1944. You would have been separated just like we separated you, and those of you in my group would have been taken directly to the gas chamber because you were of no use. And I thought, this is the greatest tour guide I've ever seen. There's no way you could have taught a better lesson than that, to do the selection process that separated those who were going to live and those who were going to die. An absolutely amazing and tragic example. Well, I could go on for many, many podcast episodes, but I'm going to stop right here. I hope that those of you that ask me to do some episodes on some of my experiences around the world got what you were looking for. I've enjoyed reminiscing, and I'll be sharing a lot more of my experiences around the world on the regular episodes of the podcast, and we're going to pick back up in our thematic area this coming Monday called Times of Joy and Times of Sorrow. And I hope you will join us every Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S. time, for the regular episodes. But thank you for watching these special episodes of Some Stops Along the Way that talked about the good, the bad, and the just plain weird things that have happened to me around the world. Until next time, thanks for joining me on Some Stops Along the Way. I'm Mark McCord. Have a great week.